join me in giving a warm welcome to our distinguished guest speaker, Kelly Beadle. Kelly.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Linda. Thank you for having me and spending your time this morning thinking about how to grow future voters. It's great, and a lot of the work that we've been doing at Circle really aligns with this topic, so I'm really excited to share with you some of the research. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about our growing voters framework that we have been developing and what kind of research that we have that really feeds into this idea of growing future voters. And then we'll talk a little bit about voter turnout and how to think about empowering and engaging young people in 2022. Are you seeing my notes slide or are you seeing? Okay, I'm going to swap my screens. Okay, you seeing this?
We were not seeing your note slides. I'm sorry. I said that right. What you had before was perfect.
Okay, great. Now, all right, so before I jump in, I'll tell you a little bit about Circle. We are a research institute that is celebrating last year, our 20-year anniversary as experts on youth civic participation. We are based at Tufts University, which is in Boston. And what we try to do when we think about youth civic participation, we've talked a lot about voting, excellent videos about the importance of voting, but we also want to connect that back to the institutions that are going to help inform and create future young voters. So this is the growing voters framework that we have developed. And so I'm going to just touch on each of these topics individually and highlight some of the research that we have and potentially some resources for you all as you're thinking about your work for the upcoming year. So first of all, thinking about voting laws. So as Linda mentioned, young people do tend to vote at lower rates than older voters. There's a couple reasons for this. Number one, they are often voting for the first time. And I'll talk about a specific example in Virginia from this last election that shows that. So they don't necessarily know where to go, have the same kind of patterns, right? The second thing is young people move a lot. I know that I moved almost every year throughout my 20s, and needing to update the registration each time makes it a challenge. So that's where voting laws and changing policies can be really impactful at increasing youth participation. We have found through our research that a number of the policies that were proposed in the federal voting rights legislation, HR 1, we found that states that have already adopted a lot of those policies tend to see more young people who are participating. So we've looked at specific facets of these policies as well and found that automatic voter registration, online voter registration, same day registration where you can register on election day, and the pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds who can register and then will be added to the rolls when they turn 18, all can have a good impact on young people participating. I know that Wisconsin has some of these policies, but not others. So thinking about what are some ways that you can really institutionalize and kind of codify and make it easier for young people to participate. Another element of our growing voters framework is youth-centered election administration. When young people walk into a polling place, they often don't see people who look like them. And so this is what we have found with some of our community-based partners. The idea surfaced that, it would be having young people involved in the process of actually administering elections could be very helpful and impactful activity for young people. We have been partnering with Minneapolis, the city of Minneapolis, in their student election judge program, where they recruit high school and college students to serve as election judges. This is helpful for the city because it fills some of the staffing needs, needing to recruit hundreds or thousands of judges each election to serve in those polling places. Was especially helpful in 2020, wanting to make sure that they could run elections safely, and having younger people be able to fill that role was really critical for them. For young people themselves, we have done some surveys of the student election judges and have found that this gives them a firsthand look at how elections are actually run. And so when you think about what Deanna was saying about being really that liaison to other people, having folks who really kind of understand the process is really critical to make sure that young people do have the information from people that they know from class or from their other activities. And then lastly, we have also done some analysis that found that voter turnout may be higher when youth election judges are in place. So it's just kind of a win-win-win situation, thinking about how to, not have them in the pipeline, but also having them in the actual voting booths and helping to run elections. Another pillar of the growing future voters is a very large one is around civic education. We have many wonderful colleagues at Circle who are experts in K-12 civic education, who partner with school districts and states to develop civic education curriculum and evaluate it. I am not one of those staff people, so this is not my area of expertise, but I do want to highlight that we have been involved in many efforts, including Educating for American Democracy, which came out last year, really laying out a roadmap for how to improve civic education in our country. Our executive director, Kay Kawashima Ginsburg, was one of the main contributors to that report. So that is a resource that can be used for both educators and folks in the classroom, but also members of the community to really tackle the issue of civics education. Part of the motivation behind this is that civic education is funded at much lower levels than other subject areas. And we see also in test scores that we are not seeing increases in test scores in civics over the long term. So really feeling like, especially in this moment, thinking about how to have folks have better education in the classrooms will better prepare them to be civic actors when they are of voting age. This is just a little bit more detail about what is included in that Educating for American Democracy framework, which you can probably Google or find on our website, but has a number of subject areas, not just voting, but thinking about broader themes around society and participation. Another pillar is lifting youth voices. So as many of the young people talked about, those are great examples of young people talking about their own personal experience and how important it is to other folks that they are connected to and other folks in their community. So we believe that in order for young people to become more active, they need to hear from their peers. And one way to do that is through social and digital media. Of course, young people are online at very high rates. And when we think about participation of youth of color, which as one of the young people highlighted is a kind of growing segment of our population, we also find that the digital and social media is more used by youth of color. So an important tool for equity and participation. We also believe that there is a lot of information and it's hard to cut through all of that. And seeing information from a peer is a really important way to do that as folks are bombarded with all kinds of communication and potentially misinformation. Another way to lift youth voices is providing opportunities for leadership that are so not simply voting, but ways that they can lead in their communities. We have seen unprecedented youth activism over the last few election cycles, coming off of on the heels of tragic events that have occurred around the country. So we are seeing that young people are able to be leaders and bring their peers into the fold in a number of different ways, and providing avenues to do that are not simply happening on 1 or 2 days a year, but are more ongoing in ways to express their voice is really critical. So that is kind of our overall growing voters framework. Of course, what many folks have talked about, and an important way to measure whether or not these are growing future voters, is by youth turnout. And we do have really good data and information about how young people are participating. So this graphic here shows you the historical trends of young people's participation since the passage of the 26th Amendment, when 18 to 20-year-olds were given the right to vote. So you can see that the 2018 election in particular, a midterm election, had record high youth turnout. 2020 was also saw very high levels of youth participation. But it was also comparable to some other previous years. So we have more young people than ever who have been getting out and having that first experience at the polling place. And that's a great indication for the work ahead and continuing that. We've done analysis of us state by state also to see what voter turnout looks like in all the different states. And of course, it is different everywhere depending on voting laws, as I mentioned. We saw that, for example, states that send ballots to every voter, every registered voter, saw some of the highest civic participation in 2020. When you get the ballot at your house and simply have to return it, it eliminates barriers, means people don't have to find out where the polling place is, for example. But the turnout did really vary across the country based on other kind of contexts as well. My state of Minnesota has routinely had very high voter turnout and very high youth voter turnout. So Wisconsin is not colored in here. We don't have really good information about age on the Wisconsin voter database that we conduct our analysis on. But what I can tell you is that Wisconsin in general also has very high turnout. So we can make assumptions that youth turnout is also comparable to some of these higher turnout states, Colorado, Maine, and Oregon. So sorry, I can't share more specific Wisconsin information for you. So thinking ahead to this upcoming year, we heard from Deanna, who is a college student. So reaching folks on campuses is a great way to engage young people. They're in one place, and you can find folks in the classroom on a college campus where folks are hanging out. But we also want to remember that college students only represent a share of 18 to 22-year-olds. So about 55% of 18 to 22-year-olds are not enrolled in schools, are going to be working, raising families, and doing other things. So it's important when thinking about how to dedicate your programming and resources that there are going to be chunks of folks who are off campus that may be harder to reach, that might not be as engaged as the folks that are on campus. And the number of college students is slowly declining since a high around 2010. So we still have large amounts of students, young people on campus, but that is, just one avenue. Another consideration for 2022 is that many people will be voting for the first time. So we looked at Virginia, which had an election just in last year in 2021. And we found that 12% of the young people who voted in that election were voting for the very first time. So just because someone is not already registered or does not have a voting history does not mean that those young people should not be engaged and brought into the electorate. So that's an important strategy that may, when we look at the whole population, a much, much smaller share are going to be engaged for the first time in these off-year elections, but that's not the case for young people. And over 58% of the young people who voted only have voted in, one of the last 3 elections for the first time. So again, making sure that folks, if they're moving, can update their registration. If they're moving, thinking about how to provide information about where to go vote, because that may have changed as many people are going to have moved between 2020 and 2022. So that's a really critical element of engaging youth. And kind of putting it all together here, there are a lot of factors and influences in young people's lives, from their family lives to their friend networks to potentially school or workplaces, and then focusing on folks who are cultural leaders or influencers in their lives. So this provides a lot of opportunities and a lot of avenues to engage young people. So thinking about, again, where do you want to put your efforts? There are many opportunities and inroads there, and it is more complex potentially than folks who are not at such a transitional point in their lives. So I'm leaving you with just a few kind of thoughts and questions. So thinking about, again, electoral engagement, just coming back to some of these previous points, thinking about finding folks not on college campuses and finding folks who, at Circle, we work through all of our lenses through all of our work is through a lens of equity. So thinking about how can we make the electorate more equitable and make sure that youth of color are also being are participating at equal rates to all youth. So thinking about those unique populations and what will be effective strategies to engage them. And that might not be just one thing. It might not just be door knocking, or might not just be, going to a college campus, but thinking about how can young people really be the ones carrying the message to their peers and really be the spokespeople, so that we can have really effective messengers. And then thinking longer term, of course, the league has, as we mentioned many times here, over 100-year history, and thinking about the partnerships that might most effectively reach young people, whether that's at the high school level and registering people in schools who are turning 18 years old, or other types of programs that might be reaching young people in communities, whether that's job training programs, other types of leadership opportunities that might be a great avenue to kind of really meet youth where they're at. And then the last two, thinking about civic education and how to support civic educators. And we have many members, candidates running for school board here today. So that's certainly a very powerful way, but other ways we can support folks in the classroom. And then lastly, what laws can we change at a state level that might make it easier for young people to participate and engage. So there is my contact information and our Twitter. So if you want to follow us on social media, I'll turn it back to Linda. Thank you so much for having me.
So please join me in welcoming Lori Stottler. Lori?
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for allowing me my shameless plug of trying to recruit poll workers into elections, not just young, but I'll take any age. So thank you for allowing me to kind of share my experience over the last 15 years. And I want to, as Kelly was speaking, there was an unsung hero that popped into my mind, and he's a teacher in Beloit, and his name is James Hoey. And he has been a real help in the clerk's office in helping me administer the paperwork required to be able to to get students to be able to work in the polling place. And I'm really grateful that we have teachers that are willing to kind of be the intermediary, because there is paperwork required for student workers. And I'll touch on that in just a minute. But, I think it's important that we all understand that youth engagement is a process, and it doesn't just happen on your 18th birthday. It's both nature and nurture. And I think in a lot of ways, it's more nurture. And the solution to growing future voters, the process, it starts at home around the age of 10, when you're doing home activities that demonstrate how voting works and how a democracy in our government works with majority rule. And parents who vote will create children who grow up to vote. I mean, that I see it constantly with the young people that are becoming adults and coming in. I see very regular voters there. I think it's really important to take your children to the polls, especially when they become teens. That's usually when they don't want to come with you, but it's the best time that they have that experience, because you're really giving them that behind the wheel experience for voting. Make the voting process a normal activity in basic decision making. And so, try to demonstrate the outcome of what voting looks like. And I think with youth today, your biggest outcome is going to be in a peer-to-peer environment. So whenever you can do a peer-to-peer environment, if you're going to do a voter engagement at the schools, try to get a young person at your side that's going to give you street cred, for lack of a better term, because the peer-to-peer option is a great way to go. We do have student election official programs for students to work the polls. And just like James Hoey, maybe you want to try to help be the intermediary for paperwork in that matter, to make sure that we get the signature of the principal and the parents, and that the youth gets freed up from their activities to be able to help at the polls. By helping at the polls and empowering them at the polls, then that automatically brings them into the process. In this political environment that we're living in, I think in order to engage future voters, we also have to model positive political behavior, talking about civil discourse and practicing having conversations that are uncomfortable. And, freedom in debate is in making sure they have that environment that they can start to have those conversations, helping them to find, especially in local elections, but also in federal elections, because we don't want people voting just on what they see on TV, right? You want them to actually be able to have facts and evidence to be able to choose who they're voting for. So helping young people to find that path to, when they place their pen on a ballot, to have, educated choices. I've always opened up my office when at the county clerks and at the city clerk, right down to offering to let the schools use our voting equipment to hold like city council elections, so that they can get used to, seeing the equipment and filling out an official ballot. Lisa at the county has offered that as well. So let's see, what are some of my other, I'm excited to hear that the charter school has already booked with us to come and tour a polling place on April 5th. So classroom field trips to the polls, especially in high school, would be a good way to bring us some more young voters. And then there's things that, we think about how bad COVID has been, but one thing that COVID did gift us was the ability to bring people into the classroom via live stream. So even though Kelly's in Minnesota, we could bring her into a classroom to help allow for a plethora of individuals like league members, clerks, election commission representatives, chief inspectors. It would be great to have people that work in the field come and talk to kids as they're starting to enter the election field, to talk to them about that, really connect them to the resources. And then, kids are not afraid of technology, and we're going to be starting these Badger books. And one of my pipe dreams, and hopefully I can make it happen, is I would love to give youth a leadership role in these Badger books. And if I could get high school seniors or even people from UW Whitewater at Rock County to be my technology technicians and manage some of those things on election day, I think the young and the old would really pair well together on that. And, if they have a leadership role at the polls, they'll continue to come back. Selfies are still cool. So young people love taking selfies on election day and posting them. So this is one of those peer-to-peer examples of engaging young people and having a polling place that provides a great backdrop. So a few years ago, Beloit had bought some selfie stands to put up in the polling place just before COVID, where, after a young person votes for the first time, they can take a picture behind that. They're not bothering anybody, but then that social media kind of starts a stir, and it's just another example of that peer-to-peer option. TikTok voter education programs. I mean, we just have to stay current with some of the things that they're using and jump in on that end. I guess to wrap up, I'd say myvote.wi.gov has made registering to vote, finding your polling place, and seeing or requesting your ballot so much easier than we ever had it when we were entering into voting mode as a young adult. So even when you're holding registration drives, I would encourage all league members to use the technology route of My Vote via tablets or computers over the paper route. As you know, paper, it generally deters young people. It looks like a homework assignment more than it does something that they're excited to do. So keep that technology coming. And while today's discussion is about growing